Oops.
Hey,
Okay. Let's see what it does. Anyway.
we are now being live streamed.
Okay. Yeah, I think I got it. I got it.
Okay.
Nope, I don't got it. Friggin' hell. Yep. Video is private. It says I can't. Well, I guess I can't be on.
What? Really? It says it's private?
Yeah. You must have blocked me.
No, I didn't.
It did this last time, actually. I don't care.
All right.
Okay, now we're good. We're good. All right. I don't know why I'm getting so excited. We're fine. Anyway, yeah.
There's one person watching, apparently.
It's probably one of us. It's probably one of us.
If anyone's out there, say hi.
If you're out there, say hello.
Jay Price was the first one to stop on.
That was a high moment. That was a
high morning, Jim. Good morning, Jim. Good morning, Scott.
Oh, hey, good morning. Good morning as we try to get the machine going
Jim and
today.
Scott on here.
Yeah. I hope you guys are well. I see.
Hope you both had a good Thanksgiving.
Yeah, well, past Thanksgiving, we're on to Christmas now, Mare.
Yep.
We're on to Christmas. What is wrong with this damn screen? Okay.
Good morning, Miranda.
Oh, hey. Anyway, yeah. So it's good to do this in the morning again. Last couple of weekends we've been kind of bouncing around a little bit, so we did some night action, some night work, as Harry Harrison would say. But yeah, it's good to get back. Good to get back in the morning again. Get back in the swing of things again with this. So.
Oh, Malcolm Private Main is on here from. I think he's from New Hampshire. I hope I'm getting that right.
Yeah. New Hampshire hockey played Maine last night. The big game last night up at Orono, and Maine won 5-2. So all the people in New Hampshire will be very sad. Tell my UNH graduate friends were sad today.
Oh, Malcolm said he's already got his Christmas decorations up. That's awesome.
Well, that's cool. Yeah, we're slowly but surely. We're going to be doing Christmas in Gettysburg this year, so we have to wait another week or two to go down there and then set everything up down there. So you'll have to set everything up while I sit on the couch and imbibe, probably, but who knows? I'll probably have to help you out, so that's cool.
Oh, thank you, Patrick. Patrick says, good morning. Keep up the good work. Thank you. Yes, we definitely enjoy doing this podcast.
It's a lot of fun.
Live streams too. You guys are what make, the people that come on here are what make these live streams so much fun to do, because everybody comments and they talk with each other. Jim said he had an excellent Thanksgiving. He's now in customer service hell. Yes, I can understand that.
Oh, yeah, I can only imagine. That stinks, but that's you deal with the public. It's tough. We've all been there. Yeah. So we Thanksgiving here.
Yeah, it was fun. It's good. We saw some of the Thanksgiving parade, which was 2 weeks ago. They have it the Saturday before Thanksgiving, so that was cool to see that. I don't like seeing red coats though.
Now we saw the Thanksgiving parade here in Plymouth, where we live, and then we saw the remnants of the Macy's Day Parade in New York City last weekend. They were still cleaning it up and still taking on the barricades. We got to see a little bit of that, so that was pretty cool. New York is a fun city.
Good morning, David. Oh yes, New York. Yeah, we were in New York last Saturday. We want to go back because we want to have a look at the draft riot.
There's a lot of cool.
We didn't get to see much of that. We did see we found a plaque randomly down by Battery Park that was from when McClellan was governor, right, of New Jersey or something like that.
He was doing something with the bridges and stuff like that down in New York. So it's to see George B. McClellan's plaque. But no, there's a lot these northeastern cities, Boston, New York City. There's a lot of Civil War here. People don't realize there is. People assume there's a lot of Rev War, which of course there is in both cities, but there's a lot of Civil War, especially Boston.
Well, we saw Grant's tomb.
Yeah, that was
an amazing experience. If anybody has been before, I'm sure you found it amazing as well. But anybody that hasn't been to Grant's tomb, get there. It is a really amazing experience. And we I guess they're park rangers, right? The park ranger, it was funny. There was a big group. We were the only ones in there to begin, and the park ranger explained to us how to, we could go. We didn't realize we could walk right down in the kind of the crypt area. So then this big group comes in and we go out to leave, and we're standing outside, and the park ranger comes out after they leave and says, do you guys have a few minutes? We're like, yes, absolutely. And he told us about the architecture and that.
He kind of gave us our own little private behind the scenes tour of Grant's tomb, which was actually really cool.
And of course I asked him, I said, are they in the ground? Because you suspected they were in the ground. And I asked him that, and he said, no, they're in those, I guess they would be crypts. Or those, I don't want to call them a box. So anyway, when you're standing, you are they're right there, Grant and Julia. And it's really interesting, if you stand at one point, like when you go down, if you stand and you look right through the two tombs, the person's face you see is Sherman's. His bust is right there.
Yeah, there are statues that surround it, like little busts in a lower
And I thought one of them
rotunda.
was Logan, but it was Ord.
Yeah, it was Ord, it was
Because I was like, why
Sherman.
is Blackjack Logan here? Sheridan.
Sure, yeah. And then what's cool about it too is they got a really nice mural of Lee shaking Grant's hand at Appomattox.
Yeah.
So it's really cool. It's a great. If people haven't been there, there's plenty of free street parking around the area, and there's a little visitor center, which was admittedly it's an old bathroom they converted to a visitor center, which is kind
Yeah.
of weird. But you go in there and they have a couple artifacts. But definitely it's cool. It's pretty neat if you're going to go to New York City. Definitely check out Grant's tomb. If you haven't been there, if you have been there, you know what I mean. But if you haven't been there, absolutely check it out because it's pretty neat though. Because it's just you're the closest physical you'll ever be to these people,
Yeah.
and that's why we love going to the cemeteries. We see you go visit these
Yeah.
people. There's a lot of Civil War people buried here where we live here in Massachusetts. So and so it's pretty neat. It's pretty good to go see that.
Yeah, but it
And
was that
imagine
Grant's grave is definitely worth checking out. David just said he likes my background. I have Franklin, and obviously
yeah,
Pat Claiborne,
Franklin.
front and center.
Franklin 159 was just the other day on the 30th. I can't believe it's already December. It's December 2nd, which is the anniversary of the death of John Brown and Pauline Cushman today. So big death day in American history, Civil War anyway. But yeah, Franklin, is big. I mean, that's I hope that next year's 160th they do a big deal with that. But 1 year away. But you talk a lot about that battle and just what a complete disaster that whole thing was. And it gets overshadowed. They call it the Pickett's Charge of the West, but it was actually much worse than Pickett's Charge.
It's so much worse than Pickett's Charge. It's so much like just, I don't know, like those 6 generals. It was Strahl, Gist, Claiborne,
Adams, Granberry, Gist, Carter, Strahl, and then John C. Brown. He gets mortally wounded. He does. So yeah, we put a picture up the other day of Claiborne. Yeah. And some people reminded us that there was 6 total, which of course, but we don't have a picture with every all 6 statues. We don't have a picture
of a statue with Hiram Granberry.
So we make the big picture. Well, no, we have. But that's a big deal. And a lot of these people, we're actually going to do an episode on Hiram Granberry next week if Mary ever gets crap together. Here we go, rolling with this.
We'll get grad school and final projects
grad school. But we'll do that. But Franklin's a fascinating study. There are a lot of people who do it right with that. There are people who, you don't see, I've never really met a Schofield fan per se, but for John Schofield, but I guess they're out there. David S. Stanley, but again, John Bell Hood is the, I don't want to say the infamous one with this, but I think people who study that Battle of Franklin, you have to wonder. You have to wonder what's going on in that fella's head with a lot of this. But again, we have the benefit of looking back in history. And I think when you talk Spring Hill or you talk Franklin, you kind of miss the fact that it's also John Schofield doing well versus Opdyke versus Hood doing badly. But at the end of the day, Hood he was going full speed no matter what. That was his deal. He was, if hell or high water, he was going to do his job, and his job was to keep Schofield out of Nashville. And you can argue if it was fruitless or whatever, but at that time, that getting that northern supply route of Nashville and getting that town was a big deal, even though really probably was in hindsight. But you could look at that battle and you could scratch your head on a bunch of different things. It certainly doesn't speak well of John Bell Hood, and I think
it doesn't. I mean, when we had Craig Simons on, he said Hood was a guy who was great in division command, great corps, but geez, in over his head when he was in command of an army. And I've been shocker. I've been reading Howard's letters that are online from Howard University, and I found out his horse's name yesterday, which is Charlie. But the one thing that I was going through, and Howard, he talks a bit, he mentions Bragg in passing, kind of like Bragg's command in the Army of Tennessee when they were in just about the siege that was going on in Chattanooga. And the only disparaging remark he makes is towards Hood, and he writes his wife and said Hood is stupid.
Yeah.
Like he said, but it's stupid. I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah,
Like,
calling that whole thing is hilarious because if you know Howard, he doesn't really, he's
he
not,
doesn't
he's
really say
very,
anything. He doesn't say anything bad about Bragg. He doesn't say anything bad about real. And when Hooker, like he writes his wife and he says very nonchalantly, well, Hooker left because he was not happy with my command. So fair warning, you're going to read a lot of shit of like, bad stuff about me in the newspapers. And then he goes on to say, yeah, and that all that stuff that the Cincinnati Gazette wrote about me at Chancellorsville, that was from Hooker's staff. Like he
yeah. Well, I
basically
mean,
says, he's like,
it doesn't take a genius to figure out the politics. And we're going to talk about the Longstreet book here in a second, the Varon interview we did the other day. But it doesn't take a genius to understand that a lot of the stuff that's said about people, good and bad, it comes from somebody trying to make a spin one way or the other, either someone trying to spin themselves or spin somebody else, or trying to bring somebody down. And that's a big deal. For those who listened, we did the episode the other day with Elizabeth R. Varon. She wrote the book Longstreet, the Confederate General Who Defied the South, and it's a great book. And it's in my opinion, it's the best Longstreet book out there because it talks about his Civil War, the good and the bad that he did, but then it talks about why the perception, plus or minus, especially negative, takes place after the war. And it may seem pretty logical on hindsight, but when you really get into the weeds with Longstreet, you realize what an interesting guy he was, because this is a guy who, he's raised by his uncle Augustus, who was a hard fire eating bastard as far as pro-slavery, pro-secession. This guy handed out pennies on Halloween. This guy did it all, right? And he grows up in that mindset after his parents die, and then he's Longstreet's got his head filled with this stuff. He goes, he joins the military. He goes to West Point, graduates 54th out of 56 because he basically was a party boy at school. He was, and he's going to end up basically kind of as the war goes on. I mean, this is the guy who was very instrumental in capturing free blacks in the Gettysburg campaign and bringing them to. So this is who he was. Longstreet was a bad hombre during the Civil War, but when the war ends, he realizes that he's one of the first people to come out and stop prevent this lost cause thing. We're saying, look, we lost. We got to freaking move on here. And then once he gets the job at the customs house in New Orleans, he does the unthinkable, which is he hires free blacks to be working with him. He's in charge of the New Orleans and Louisiana militia. He's going to have black officers, black soldiers, and the people like the Jubal Earlys of the world, the D.H. Hills of the world. It's unthinkable. Then he becomes friends with Benjamin Butler.
Yeah, which was
the
a
beast
real,
of New Orleans.
Which was a real, like, he just kind of like doubled, like, I don't want to say he doubled downs on it, but whenever he gets called out for it, he's like, oh yeah, well, watch me now. Like, I'm going to do even more. But the interesting thing, sorry, go ahead.
Also, his uncle Augustus, he's still alive. He's writing him letters saying, James, what are you doing? You're destroying your entire legacy. And he's basically, because he's writing letters to the newspapers in Richmond and places of the North, basically saying, we lost, we have to move on. The only way for the South to be part of the country again is to embrace Republicans. And this flies right in the face of everything that he believed before. If you want to see a guy do a complete 180, a complete personality change, it's James Longstreet. And Varon's book is great because she talks about that, and a lot of that Lee versus Longstreet stuff that exists today, it doesn't go back to, I mean, they use Gettysburg as the flashpoint, but guys like Marshall, guys like Taylor, guys like Samuel R. Johnson, all these people who were around at that time, they're going to come out and they're going to use all this race stuff to paint the picture against Lee, because Longstreet's close friends with Grant from West Point. Lee was very against Grant being president. And so they use a lot of this racial stuff to draw that divide with Lee. And all the stories that come out now about Lee cost Gettysburg. I mean, Longstreet cost Gettysburg. He didn't go against Lee. I mean, he went against Lee. That's it. It all comes. None of this stuff in real time was said during the battle. Don't forget, Lee resigned. He wanted to resign after Gettysburg, and he's the one who said, "This is all my fault." After the war, there was a big push to blame Longstreet for Gettysburg, and it was all because of the things he did to go against the family,
Yeah.
and it still persists today. And that's what's
Yeah,
fascinating about it.
and that's what's is the politics that gets behind it. Yeah, and William mentions or Bill mentions like anyone wondered if Longstreet and Jackson suffered from depression. I think Jackson did. And then probably Longstreet a little bit. And then Frank mentions like he lost his children to scarlet fever early
Yeah,
in the
he
Civil
loses three of
War.
his four kids in about a week's period in early
Yeah.
1862.
And they say he
the,
never was the same. Like he was not the same after that.
well, his personality was like a roller coaster. He went
Yeah.
from after his kids died, in early 1862, he turned inward and became a very pro-Confederate, gave fiery football coach type speeches, fighting for the Confederacy, fighting for your homes. And so he had a real change. And the thing about it that we mentioned before, in West Point, he was a party guy. It's hard to imagine, if you study James Longstreet or you see the movie Gods and Generals or Gettysburg, he was a fun-loving guy who told jokes, he laughed,
yeah.
But then his personality changed when the kids died. And he went to a very dark and sullen place.
Yeah.
In that sullen, that old grumpy Pete, that they say from the movie.
Yeah.
And I think the movie actually even references the kids dying at one point. I think
it does.
The
book Killer Angels does. Mike said Longstreet followed Lee's orders. Last order at Appomattox: become a good citizen. That's why they didn't put his statue on Monument Avenue in Richmond.
Yeah.
I mean, Rob Dalby said nothing has changed. Sad that spin today with social media is even more damaging.
It all comes back, and it all goes back to the fact of, and if you read her book, and this is not just my conjecture, this is Dr. Varen's point, and she's right about this because she shows her homework, she shows her work. It's because of what he did in New Orleans when he, you look at John Brown Gordon. He did the same thing as far as trying to bring Georgia back into the Union Reconstruction. And if you study the Civil War, you've got to study Reconstruction, because otherwise it's the other half of the coin. A lot of the war makes sense when you really get into Reconstruction. But Gordon maintained being a Democrat, he was obviously a capital R racist all the way through, but he knew he needed to get that home rule back in Georgia. He knew he had to appease the North by rubbing elbows with some of these Republican senators, because he knew that the only way for the South to be able to get that military district, that fifth military district down, in this area away, was to basically work with them. But he always maintained that Democrat, that style, with a Bourbon triumvirate thing we talked about. Longstreet went the other direction. Longstreet, he went the complete other way. And the thing about it, every chance he had to back away, he doubled down on it.
He
pushed more chips to the table and said, "You know something? You think hiring blacks for the customs is bad? Guess what I'm going to do now? I'm going to make a black colonel in the militia. What do you think of that?" And he's going against some of his former Confederates. And it's remarkable, because a lot of people don't study that Canal Street coup of 1874. And when you look at that, you're talking about an actual battle in the streets of New Orleans, with Longstreet leading partially black troops in battle formation against a former Confederate army in the streets of New Orleans. And people talk about insurrections and stuff like that. This was a big deal, and it's one of those things, for whatever reason, doesn't get talked about in history. And it really encapsulates what Longstreet did, because it's one thing to say you're going to do this. It's another thing to do it and tell your men to shoot at your former troops, because they're trying to overthrow the state of Louisiana and put a fake governor in, which is what they were trying to do.
Yeah. And the other point that we talked about with her, which was really good, was the fact that it was a mutually beneficial relationship for Longstreet and for Grant. Like, for Grant saw it as like, okay, if this guy's going to be on our side, we can use this to our benefit with like Reconstruction and all this other stuff. And, Varen's a very good writer. And like you said, she's done her homework, and it shows a side of Longstreet, I think, that doesn't get talked about enough. But it's like, there's a lot of books that just focus on him at Gettysburg or him during the Civil War, and they kind of like that. But really what happens is all this shit comes out about him after the Civil War. Jubal Early, before he leaves in shame to Canada, he, really just blast Longstreet for what he's doing.
Somebody else who got shamed and ran to Canada.
Yep.
Come to think of it. But that's the thing is oh hey Ski. But a lot of the books, Jeffrey Wirt's book, for example, they talk about the Longstreet Lee thing like it was happening in real time, right? Like right when the battle ends, everyone's blaming Longstreet, Longstreet, Longstreet. This was a post-war phenomenon, and we saw it a lot with Jeb Stuart too.
Mm-hmm.
When Taylor and Marshall were trying to blame Jeb for Gettysburg,
yeah,
they're trying to protect Lee. Lee's the only one who ever accepted blame for Gettysburg. People, we said before, he tried to resign after Gettysburg. And how many people in today's day are going to say, it's all my fault. I was wrong. You married guys out there, what the hell, good luck with that. Try that. But the thing about it is Longstreet, he was somebody who was Lee's true number two.
Yeah.
And people think of Jackson, but it was really Longstreet. Longstreet was always the guy. When Battle of Fredericksburg, speaking of ski, it popped in my head now. When Lee had to go back to Richmond before the Battle of Fredericksburg, and he needed someone to be in charge of the army, it was Longstreet he put in charge, not Jackson. Jackson got all butthurt over that. Maybe that's why he had all those lemons, Mary. Maybe that's why, right? And so because it was always a who does Dad like better, but it was Longstreet.
Yeah.
And so that's what her book and other books really talk about. People talk about, Longstreet was trying to live up to Jackson's, and that's just not really true.
No, and I think it goes back to the historical memory of Jackson, dying when he did, in this kind of historical memory of him and Lee and this great, kind of this great partnership and all that. And again, it goes back to we talk about this all the time. It goes back to historical memory. Like we were reading, for example, in the Howard letters this morning, I found where he talks about General Grant, and he says about Grant never drank or swore, or he doesn't drink and he doesn't swear. Now, Howard didn't know him at Vicksburg, but what Howard mentions is, he said, basically implies that, and he's writing to his wife saying this, like, he's so different from how he was portrayed after Shiloh. And that's
but you got to remember, this is...
No, I know. I just, I know, we talk, and yes, he doesn't know Grant at Vicksburg or whatever, but you mentioned, the whole Shiloh thing shows how damning what Halleck did was. That people...
and that's the thing too, is Grant's another guy who, you look at the perception now of Grant, and just obviously he's up there with George Washington as a great... I don't mean that. I mean the reputation of a drinker and a butcher, right?
Yeah.
And the drinking thing was put in place by Halleck, because Halleck wanted control. And he had control until Grant ends up taking over Donelson and Henry, right? So he ends up taking control, and he's going to use that drinking thing to try to bash him every step along the way. I don't think people realize what a sneaky little shit Halleck was, as was Stanton. But Halleck, and so now you talk to people, the first thing you think about with Grant, well, maybe the first thing, but they're going to think about him being like he was perpetually drunk, like he was, it was always call me maybe time for him, right? And that just wasn't the case for Grant. And I mean, according to Howard, if you read those letters to me for a full hour this morning, your Howard letters. But if Howard's right, I mean, he did get hammered during the Vicksburg campaign, but maybe it was an off thing. But he basically, he said he never drank and never swore.
Yeah.
And so who would benefit from setting a rumor out that this guy was a drunken clown who got his men killed? It's going to be Halleck.
Yeah. And Howard admitted that a lot of it was rumors after Shiloh that were meant to destroy Grant's reputation. It's interesting seeing it, like, as he's writing this, to his wife and all that. And it's interesting reading it, and all the stuff that he says, for the whole thing where he said Hood was stupid. And unpredictable. And then the other thing I found, speaking of Halleck, is a letter he was talking to his wife about Halleck, and it was right after Gettysburg, and he was talking about what was going to happen to the 11th Corps. And one of the things was they were going to split it up between the 12th and the 2nd, and Howard was going to go command the 2nd Corps. Which that was really
we've talked about that off and on here for a while. But you finally found the actual smoking gun that said Howard was getting the 2nd Corps.
Yeah.
Which, and how does that change history? I mean, who knows? But that's it's interesting when you see this, and um, he's not just making shit up like Hooker did.
No.
He's got letters from Halleck. He's got the
Yeah.
goods offering him.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. He's writing to his wife saying, I'm probably going to get command of the Second Corps. And then very quickly it all changed. They didn't know what was going to happen. And then Chickamauga happens, and all of a sudden, like, he's writing his wife saying, well, I'm going out west now. And when he's out west, he does reference, and Frank brought this up, it's the 160th anniversary of Knoxville. He mentions Longstreet going to Knoxville. So they knew what was happening. Like the Union.
Oh, they all did. I mean, the Richmond newspapers reporting it in the damn papers.
Yeah.
That Longstreet and his corps were going out west. So that, I mean, you could imagine Lee pounding the desk saying, are you kidding me? This isn't a freaking newspaper. But again, we were talking about Longstreet. Knoxville was, I mean, it was not a good day for him. I mean, he got pantsed.
Yeah.
By Burnside.
Bad. Yeah, bad.
I mean, there was, I mean, he goes to Knoxville. He fights basically in the snow. The ramparts are covered in ice. They can't climb up the thing. And he finally says, you know what? Screw this. Goes into winter quarters and just sits there and says, "But." So Longstreet does have a history of kind of taking his ball and going home. And all these stories get perpetuated and added on for another log on the fire to paint the anti-Longstreet tale. And, and I don't think it's always has to be one versus the other. But I do think, we mentioned before, these guys have their good days and their bad days. And certainly Longstreet's Knoxville was probably his worst day, realistically. But at the same time, and we were talking to somebody somewhere this morning on one of the social medias about what if he stayed out there and took over the Army of the Tennessee. That was never going to happen. Army of Tennessee. No.
He wanted it too.
But Lee was never ever going to let him go permanently.
No.
I mean, he was Lee's number 2 guy, and he wanted Longstreet. He trusted Longstreet. Because all this shit with Gettysburg, this is a post-war thing. It wasn't like Lee sitting there all pissy and all butthurt now about Longstreet at Gettysburg. He says, they had their issues.
Yeah.
Go away, but you're going to come back. And he obviously came back.
Yeah. And so Lynn had a comment about West Point. She didn't realize it was a party school, although she's like, I grew up near there and certainly spent a weekend or evening or 3 drinking in the woods over there back in the day.
We drank in a field at West Point a few weeks ago.
Yeah, we did. And Frank says, interesting how Jackson has a marker at Chancellorsville, yet Longstreet was wounded very close by in the wilderness and doesn't have any markers about his wounding. And David brings up the point that Longstreet didn't get those markers and monuments because he moved on from the war and didn't keep writing about the cause like others did early, and others assassinated his character.
I mean, he was a guy, he's like a guy a Red Sox player who signed with the Yankees. At the end of the day, everyone hated him. Right, the people in the North hated him because of his war activities. The fact that he was a U.S. military guy, quit his commission, fought for the Confederacy. He was rebel number 3, as far as Andrew Johnson. He didn't get his pardon because he was too high ranked. After Davis and Lee, Longstreet was a number 3 highest ranking Confederate per Andrew Johnson after the war. So he tried to get Grant. I mean, he did everything possible to get his citizenship back again.
Yeah.
But the reason why there's no monument of Wilderness is because he lived. If he died there, they would have put something in there. And of course, Chancellorsville is the holy grail for Stonewall Jackson, right?
It is, yeah.
But when you look at Longstreet, the reason why there's only 2 statues of him, right, is because he, to Gentili's point, he went against the family. Yeah. Right. That's what he did. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like he was not a good paisan John. He went against them. And you look at you look at that in the fact that what an uncrossable line it was for Longstreet to bring Dan Sickles to a reunion and go drinking with Butler and support Butler and support Grant, even though Lee's saying don't support Grant, and Longstreet says, no, I'm going to support him. He's my buddy from West Point, the class of 1853, the year before. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to support him. So he burned all the bridges, cut all the ties to the Confederacy. So of course the writers are going to hate him. Of course they are. Yeah. And you look at guys like the New York Times writer William Swinton. He was the guy who took the axe to McClellan after Lost Order 191.
Yeah.
I mean, people, you're going to people like him to write stories about the South, how the South needs to get over us. I mean, what do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's not going to be good at all. Um, and James is on here. He's going to the Sharpsburg Luminary tonight. He said we should come join him there. It's like,
Oh,
we
that's
can't,
tonight.
unfortunately. Yeah, we can't,
That is
unfortunately.
tonight.
I hope you. I've heard it's amazing though.
Now,
And
you know
then
what? I bet you. You know what? Next year we'll go because next year we're going to be
yeah,
down there permanently. So we're going to be
yeah,
we'll be there for next year. But I've always wanted to do that. Is the because
yeah. I've heard it's
that's the thing.
really.
Yeah, that's
Um,
pretty sweet.
MJ's on here, which I don't know if she heard. I talked about it before she got on here, but real quick, MJ, I found a letter this morning that confirms that Howard was going to be put in charge of the Second Corps
Yeah,
after
we
getting
found we she found the smoking gun,
letter.
MJ. We've been talking about her for a while, but we found it. She finally did. But again, that just goes to show we talked before about guys like Phil Carney and always how this thing was in flux and how things
Yeah,
change all the time. But I mean, it's amazing to think how that might have changed history, though. If you really think about
yeah.
it.
Oh yeah, that would have been total just and then like if they're gonna, but then what happens with Chickamauga, because very quickly it changed that it turned out they weren't going to disband the 11th Corps, so Howard was kind of being left in limbo, not knowing what he was going to be doing. And the next thing you know, he's like, okay, well, Hooker and Slocum and I are going out west.
You know what? Next year, Mary, we'll say this right now. Let's plan a Breakfast Club get together rendezvous with the Luminary in Antietam next year.
Yeah, and then go to Antietam Brewery after.
Oh, obviously.
Obviously.
But I think that needs to happen.
There's Lynn agrees with you that the more Lee was elevated in lost cause after the war, the more Longstreet was blamed for losses. And she agrees with David that Early really did him in. Gentile's got a question. I'd love to know if General B was referring to Jackson as standing like a stone wall as a positive or negative for not advancing.
My personal opinion is it was negative because General Bernard B and Thomas Jackson were not besties. Okay, they weren't listening to Taylor Swift together. Okay, they weren't.
Yep.
So when when B's attacking, he's going to be mortally wounded at First Manassas.
Yeah,
his men are going forward into the fire, and they look over and they see Jackson, and he says, "There's Jackson standing like a stone wall." And a lot of people think they meant that like there's Jackson doing nothing while we're fighting, and he gets killed, so we can't. And personally, I think it is too. I don't. Yeah. I think the greatest Civil War nickname in history is an insult. But that's again, there are people who think otherwise, and that knock yourself out. Think what you want, because he did stand firm like a stone wall fighting against the Union, right? In Manassas. But I mean, me being that cynical Bostonian guy, I think it was an insult because that's
a lot of people are agreeing with you on here that Gentile said they didn't like each other. The other thing too, which is kind of, I don't know if this shows Pat Claiborne had a sense of humor or not, but he had a horse called Stonewall, and I wonder if that's because he was being called Stonewall the West, and he's like, well.
Yeah.
Oh my!
But that's what's cool about this, though, is there are people who are going to sit there and tell you, no, it was this, no, it was that. We know people who they're just unmovable. They hold on to those positions like grim death. And they're unwilling to change, unwilling to be compromised. But I think the more you study this, and you mentioned Howard, he's a guy. And you're really obviously into Howard, and you've been reading these primary source letters. You've been reading nonstop. You've been reading them to me, and frankly, it's something that drive me a little crazy. Not going to lie to you, but no, they're fine. But when you read some of these things he talks about, and we surmise that he might have been in line to take the Second Corps, but seeing that Halleck letter to him and prove that he was, it kind of justifies all that in between history studying that you do.
Yeah,
that guessing, that gray area stuff, because all those sources are out there if you study long enough. There.
Yeah, and it was interesting to find that. It was also interesting to find out the name of Howard's horse was Charlie. I'd been looking for that for a while, so that was really cool. But just all this, and how much he wrote his wife and his children and explained stuff to them, like he's writing his kids, and he's like he's camped in Lookout Valley, and he talks about, oh yeah, the rebels shell us every single day. And he was talking about how he was in church one day and he was like, the rebels reminded us they were there by sending a shell over our heads. And he doesn't say anything, he never says anything disparaging about Bragg. All he says is just Bragg's command in the army. But there is one point where it's after Wrinkled Gap, so it's after the battles for Chattanooga, and I want to try and figure out what this means. he puts Bragg's army and then in brackets, Hardee commanding. So it
Well, it's
sounds like
funny
at some point Hardee had command at one point.
yeah, and when you're reading the letters from Howard, he talks about capturing that rebel Confederate. And remember, we talked about this morning. Who's in charge of the Confederates? And he says General Jellybones, right? And he goes, well, who's? And then he starts laughing. So it's great when you can find these letters to actually put fact behind those things we talk about. But I mentioned nicknames. Bragg Jellybones is a great nickname. One of the best. One of the absolute best. So it was pretty cool.
But they're probably losing their minds right now.
Oh, I know.
But yeah, but the letters are, and they're all digitized, but you can also read the actual letter, like you can see the actual letters too. And it's interesting because he drew pictures all the time for his kids. And keep in mind, he's drawing with his left hand at this point too.
You want to have some fun? If you're a righty, try brushing your teeth with your left hand sometime. Just give that a shot, okay? And see how hard that was. And the idea of losing your arm and then having to write battle reports with your opposite arm. No thanks, man.
He did a drawing of the Battle of Gettysburg, and this was like not long. I mean, he lost his arm in June, and he was back fighting again.
He was the second Manassas.
Second Manassas.
I mean, he was in the back handing out popcorn, probably with Barlow, probably. But he wasn't too busy and engaged. But he was engaged after that. Obviously, he was certainly engaged in Antietam.
Yeah, and he talks about. I think it's at Fredericksburg. His wife must have asked him in a letter how he was feeling, and he said, "I can finally sleep on my right side again."
Yeah.
So that must have been painful. I can't imagine how painful that would be, like just the healing of that. But he's back pretty quickly. Chantilly said, that was amazing. We found that in the letter.
That's that. You know what, John? That's why we do history. That's why we do it, to find these things. And that's it makes it all. That's what makes it all worthwhile. Talk about it, but yeah, but it is fun.
But yeah, the letters are just like, the ones after Gettysburg where there's so much, like he's talking about, he's writing his wife as they're on the retreat pursuing Lee. And he's like, we might get him. And then he writes this letter. Well, he got across the river.
Yeah.
Like, and reading about he's writing her the evenings, letting her know what's going on the day of the battle or like that day. And it's interesting to read the retreat from that point of view. And obviously Kent Masterson Brown used those as sources in his book too. Retreat from Gettysburg.
Well, that's what's cool. You're reading and doing history at a high level when you can read books and their sources and know where they're getting their stuff from without having to read the footnotes. But yeah, there's definitely not a lot out there of all those Howard quotes, right? Like I can't. I mean, the fact that a guy who really never insulted anybody called Hood stupid, literally, that says a lot because he didn't say a bad word about anybody. No. Although he did kind of take a beer pee all over Hooker too, but not as directly.
Rightly so. Like I think that was valid. I would too, if
Well, the fact that he blamed Howard for Chancellorsville. I mean, obviously Howard has blood in his hands, but he was also put in that position by Hooker. He also took Barlow's division away from him, right? Yeah. To go hang out with Sickles. So when you look at what he was left with. But again, you need someone. You have a chance to destroy Lee, and Lee has his greatest moment. Well, I think his retreat from Gettysburg is his greatest moment, but his best battle moment was dividing his army 3 times at Chancellorsville when Hooker had him over a barrel, dead to rights, and backed off and stopped. He had to justify why he did that. He had needed a scapegoat, and it was going to be Howard, and that's clearly who it was. And we've said before, I don't know too many generals in that spot were going to do any better with Reynolds what he was left.
None of them. No,
of course not.
And I mean, Howard does admit, like he's writing a letter on New Year's Eve, 1863, and he says to his wife, okay, 1863 has its hat and cloak on, and here's what it's saying to me. And he said, I will learn from my mistakes that I made. And he's referring to Chancellorsville. He obviously knows that he made a mistake. It's evident in and when he takes command of Army of the Tennessee, he's very much like, he feels like he's in over his head, I think, but then he finds like, okay, this is going to work out just fine. I mean, Logan's not too happy about it.
I think a lot of these guys felt they were over their heads a little bit at different points because again, this is a whole different world these guys are dealing with, and that's I mean that's the thing is that's what separates the Hancocks of the world is because they
Yeah.
were or the Grants of the world
Yeah.
is because whether they were over their head or not, they always exuded that confidence.
Yeah.
Right, especially Grant, but Hancock too. I mean, don't forget, he's in that six where he's going to come over at the Sunken Road in Antietam, and he's going to pull his gun out. He's going to threaten the Union soldiers who are rifling the bodies of the Confederates. And I'll shoot you right now if you steal anything from these dead soldiers. And at that point, they scared shitless of him.
Yeah. Oh, I would have been. I mean, Hancock is a great, he is a great soldier. As much as MJ and I go at each other about the Howard Hancock thing, which we do, like, I think we have to do an episode with her about the Howard Hancock.
Well, they're just different guys, though. Yeah. I mean, the thing about it, though, is obviously the crux of that whole thing comes from the alleged meeting of the Cemetery Hill, right? And that's fine. But again, when you look at these are just different personalities. These are different guys. You're talking about Ned Flanders, right? Going up against Bill Belichick or somebody.
Yeah, he's very much, and too, the thing about reading these letters is they are so human, and the way he talks to his wife, he's always asking about his kids. And he writes to his kids, and there's one point where he jokes around with his wife. He's like, okay, it's 6:30 in the morning here and I'm up, and he's like, I would imagine you've been up for a while too, unless you're lazy and laying in bed, but I doubt you would do that.
Maybe she had a rag over her head, she couldn't get up.
Frank said, congrats on finding all these details in Howard's letters. Did Howard ever write about the brand of running shoes he had at Chancellorsville? I said it was Nike.
Well, he had that brown horse, right?
Yeah. The brown
that
horse.
Was another fun
that was just like, okay, like, so I discover about the horse. And then some guy asks me what the color is. So then someone else steps in, basically just like, look at all that I know. Like, I'm like, good for you, like, whatever. But I mean, the person is another Howard person too, and it's kind of like a race to find the information sort of thing.
No, you guys will both probably write books on, and that'll be interesting to see how that is. But no, but as you study these people, and when you really get into the nitty gritty with these guys, as I try to pull us back to Longstreet.
We're all over them. I mean, we've had the anniversaries for Chattanooga and Ringgold Gap and Lookout Mountain recently. Franklin, and Spring Hill. And then we've had the Longstreet book as well. So there's lots going on. David said Lee may have had a great victory at Chancellorsville, but he couldn't afford the casualties. And Frank said, I believe that if Hooker did the same thing that Grant did at the Wilderness 1 year later, Chancellorsville would not be seen as a great victory for the Confederates.
Yeah, well, that's the thing is, Hooker, he was somebody who, he says himself, he lost confidence in Joe Hooker.
Yeah.
And they were right there. Right there. I mean, half of, a good percentage of Lee's army is still back at Fredericksburg, and you get a chance to rout him and beat him. And that was obviously a huge missed opportunity where they turned into Lee's greatest victory. But to David's point, he was upset that Hooker escaped because he needed to destroy the army too. I mean, you're fighting such a disparity in manpower. The only chance you had was to continue the war, 1864 for the election. But if you're going to beat them on the field, you have to destroy them.
Yeah,
and they had him pinned, and such an opportunity was lost. But again, Jackson goes down. You've got Jeb Stuart now; he's in charge of infantry.
Yeah.
So you're having your center fielder pitching out of the bullpen now, right? And so you have all these things. So you can, in real time, you can see the mess that it was. And George Meade never forgave Hooker because he had a chance. Meade hated Jeb Stuart the way you hate the Chicago Cubs, Mary, right?
Oh, yeah.
And he had a chance. He had him. He had him in his hands. And Hooker said, no, you can't attack because he's seeing butterflies flying around with his concussion. Yep. And by the time he's got a chance to hit, it's the pinwheel. And so all these opportunities lost. When you look at the lost we should do an episode of lost opportunities at Chancellorsville, right? Because when you look at that, the war could have ended either way at that battle. That's what's interesting. It's like Spotsylvania, right? Where Lee was completely screwed and somehow got the hell out of that. but either army could have been destroyed at Chancellorsville, and that would have in the East that could have ended everything.
Yeah.
And there's not too many battles you can say if things played out the way they could have, one of the two armies was done.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. No, exactly. Bjorn's on here. So just want to give a shout out to him. He said, "Hey nerds, great episode this week. Thank you." And if any of you are looking for a copy of the Longstreet book by Elizabeth Barron, Bjorn does have them at Abraham Lincoln Bookshop, and they have like a signed book plate in them. So they're, and I think they're first edition copies. But the other book that came out this week that we are both looking forward to reading is a book by Tim Smith about Albert Sidney Johnston.
Yeah, Tim Smith. We had him on a book club. Yeah, we did. We had him on a book club a few weeks ago. Few months ago, I guess. Time flies, Mary. Time flies, and Patriots stink. But but he's somebody who, and he was, he's somebody who you could listen to him, and he's like Kent Masterson Brown. You listen to Tim Smith talk, and you swear he was there.
Oh, I know. And we watched him on. So Bjorn at Abraham Lincoln Bookshop, they do this really great program, Facebook Live, usually in the afternoons. Where they have authors on. He had Elizabeth Barron on, and that was really good to hear her talk about her book.
Well, she's awesome.
She's very good. Like, she's
sorry
really
to interrupt you, but if you listen to our episode, please go online and listen to Bjorn's interview with her too.
It's really good.
Because there are questions that are discussion. Our discussion was a little different than his, and he talked about things that we didn't get a chance to, and vice versa. But go on to the Abraham Lincoln Bookshop and go find Bjorn's interview, because he does a great job too. And I made sure I watched it after we did ours, so I didn't feel like I was stealing his questions, admittedly. Yep. But listen to both, because it gives you a good full 360 view. Elizabeth Barron is awesome. Yeah. I mean, she's personable, she's fun, but this girl's got the cred though. This one,
oh yeah, she's really nice too. It was great to have her on and talk to her about the Longstreet book. And then we watched Tim Smith on Abraham Lincoln Bookshop, and he's such a good guy to listen to talk. Bjorn had him on to talk about the Iron Dice of Battle, which is the new book about Albert Sidney Johnston, and then to talk about his next volume in the Vicksburg book he's writing as well.
I mean, I think it's safe to say that Tim Smith is probably the most knowledgeable Vicksburg guy.
Oh yeah,
right, probably on the planet. Yeah,
I mean, he probably is. He's such a nice guy too.
Oh, I remember we had him in the book club when we're done. He's like, "Oh, we got to be done. Oh, too bad." He was just hitting his stride. No, we have to be respectful for these people, though. But there's so many. We're blessed right now because there's so many good books coming out right now. Yeah. I mean, there's still the obligatory Lincoln book that keeps coming out over and over and over again. But now you got a new book on Longstreet. You got a new book. Meade's book came out not too long ago. The Albert Sidney Johnston book just came out. This fantastic book on McClellan, The Tale Untwisted, came out. So there's a lot of history where people are finally going against that historical narrative and digging out and saying, wait a second, I heard some different stories about McClellan of Order 191, the Maryland campaign. I heard maybe he didn't suck after all. And then Alexander Racine writes this book that kind of talks a lot about the things we've been talking about, which is this misperception. And you read it and you go, damn. And that's why it's important to always keep that open mind, right? Because the things that you're completely convinced about, you read and it puts that cloud in your head where shit, maybe I'm wrong. But like we said earlier, there are too many people who are closed-minded who don't want to listen to it.
Yeah, they don't want to change. They don't want to change their minds about stuff. Jim mentions that the Stones River anniversary is coming up and that the government's not going to be shut down this year, so the anniversary is actually going to be happening.
There we go.
Oh, Tyler McGraw's on here. Hey, Tyler.
Hello, Tyler. Tyler's a big Baltimore fan, Mary. His Ravens are doing really well now. I hope I'd like to see him get in the Super Bowl. That'd be kind of cool. I hate the friggin' Chiefs, for God's sakes.
So do I.
Anyway.
Lynn mentions she's up for Antietam next year, and we could add a visit to my friend's distillery in Martinsburg, home of Confederate spy Bell Boyd.
You had me at distillery. Yeah. We'll have a good time with that. We'll check out some things. But I think what's great is people like the Savas Beatties of the world, these Simon and Schuster. They're in an era where I think the Civil War is kind of a third rail. People don't really want to talk about. They're putting out these books now where you can look at these contrarian type of attitudes, and I think it's great. I think the more you can read, the better. But like I said, we're blessed with in a short period of time, a handful of really good books that just came out that are gonna piss some people off. People aren't gonna like that too much. People are gonna be scared, Mary, to read some of these
Weird.
books if they even do read it, because they're gonna have to realize that maybe, just maybe, the things they thought are wrong, and that's hard for some people,
It
right?
is, yeah. And I mean, I used to have the perception of Howard that a lot of people have, that he like ran from Chancellorsville. He had a bad day at Gettysburg, but then like the the more you look into the history of it, the more you see, what's actually happening. Just like Longstreet, that a lot of this bad stuff about him comes out 10 years after the Civil War, whereas the Howard Hancock myth is a little bit similar in that it came out a few months after Gettysburg, and it was because of the media and the attention Howard was getting over being named one of the victors of Gettysburg, and Hancock's crowd didn't like that. And Howard was accused of like seeking political office and all that. There was all these disparaging newspaper articles written about it, and that's where that myth begins, is from those articles, that there was
Yeah.
something between them, that they hated each other when really they didn't.
No, that's again, you're always going to have that. But no, it's interesting when you look at this though. It is also talked about a lot of these lower level B
Mm-hmm.
list people who are just as important as the Grants or the Longstreets, the
Yeah.
Lees, right? And it's a great study. It just really, really is. I see the Belle Boyd's mentioned on here. She's another one. I mean, if anybody gets a chance to go to Front Royal down in Virginia,
Yeah,
go ahead and
I
do it,
definitely want to go there.
because you can go visit her house, and if you like Mosby, there's a lot of Mosby history on there too. I know. Speaking of John, and I was down in Front Royal. What the hell was I down there? Like maybe like 2 or so years ago with our friend Bill.
Yeah.
And we went. There's a Confederate museum, and we went down there. And when I go to these places, I tend to wear my blue Union Kepi hat just because, right?
Yeah.
And most people laugh at it, especially in Virginia or Georgia or places like that. But we went to this museum, and the guy was kind of a dick, and he was just glaring at that, and we just had fun with him, and we're talking about, he's like he's like, oh, if you're interested in John Mosby, he's pushing the Confederates, but you could
Yep.
tell he was kind of aggravated, and at that very moment, um, you could hear a fire truck go by. I forgot all about the story, but a fire truck went by, and I look at the guy, I go, oh, Sheridan must be back, and he just got all white. I'm like, Bill, we gotta get out of here. We're gonna freaking ass shit. But it was pretty funny. But Front Royal is a great visit, and it's not a place people tend to really go visit because it's not a lot there. But
Yeah.
if you like Belle Boyd and you like Stonewall Jackson, that's a great place to go visit, because a lot of the city is pristine. You can still see the same road that Jackson came down.
That's really cool.
And there's a lot of Mosby stuff. That's where those guys got executed. The Mosby guys was Front Royal, right outside of it. So it's a great place to visit. But Virginia is full of places like that.
Yeah,
It really is.
Sheridan going by. I think Tyler's laughing. I think he liked that comment. Sheridan going by.
And I mean, I tend to judge. My personality is what it is. But he was just kind of like he just
Don't do that.
nope. He just had that, that he had that Michael Scott, don't you dare, that look on his face. I was like, it's like, okay, but sorry. And then he wouldn't let me use the bathroom, which pissed me off too. Sorry, gotta buy something. Okay, I get it. See you later.
Tyler said Sheridan's name brings out some funny emotions in the valley.
Well, Sheridan was scared shitless of Mosby though, but that area where we were was, my goodness gracious. You want to talk about about Sherman in Georgia? If Sherman did everything that Sheridan actually did,
Oh, I know.
it would be a different story. Sheridan is a bastard. He just sucks.
Oh yeah, I'm not a fan of Sheridan. It's interesting, like reading, like I've been reading obviously these Howard letters, but reading some of his memoirs with the March to the Sea. And he doesn't it's not a big deal to them. They're like, well, today we marched 15 miles and we're going to do this. And it's very much like, this is what we did today. It's not like, he's not talking about, yeah, today we went and burned someone's farm, blah, blah, blah. Like, it's not that exciting.
No, it's not. But that's what's good about the stories, and what's great about visiting these places is you definitely, even though you get you get the spin of the town you're in one way or the other, whether it's true or not, you hear some cool stories.
Yep.
But yeah, if you go to the Confederate Museum in Front Royal, don't wear anything Union. It's just he might have been one of those Twitter guys, Mary.
Oh
Those
God.
Confederate guys.
Yeah, Confederate cosplayers.
I don't know.
Gentili,
I
if you
don't
remember, do you
know.
remember what Gentili wants to know if you remember which town? He's like, I think it was a museum in Warrenton, which was really cool, but Lost Cause Central.
No, the one in it's right near right where Bell's Boyd house her house is. It's right nearby there, but it was it's all Virginia stuff. It's mostly a museum about the stuff that took place in Front Royal in the Valley. So it was all
Yeah,
obviously it was a lot of Stonewall, a lot of Mosby, but it was definitely fun. But the guy wasn't
not
he
having
wasn't
any of
having
it.
it. He was this old guy. Maybe he fought there. Who the hell knows? But
Maybe
he he,
there.
he looks like he'd been around a while. But it's definitely worthwhile going though. And you can drive around Virginia, and you can even Maryland for that matter. And you can basically
Mhm.
pull off any exit and go find something history
Well, that's how it
wise.
is between Atlanta and Chickamauga or
Yeah,
Chattanooga.
yeah,
Is
that's
is
true.
like all
That's true.
those like we pulled off at like we saw Jonesboro, we saw Ringgold Gap, we saw Pickett's Mill, Kennesaw, and it's like there's so much there. Oh, Tyler said, Frank, hang out in Virginia for a bit. People get real salty about these things. Folks in Winchester definitely get riled up when you bring up Milroy.
Yeah, yeah. I've spent a lot of time in Old Town and in Winchester. I mean, people who don't know Milroy is that's a cool area though in Winchester because a lot of people just go downtown. You can go see Sheridan's headquarters and you go see Stonewall's headquarters. But you go to a place like Star Force, which is one of those forts
Yeah,
that Ewell had helped push back. There's a lot of cool things in that area. No one goes. It's so funny. We went to Star Fort. We were there for about an hour. Not one person came. It's in the middle of a neighborhood. It's
yeah,
not a lot around it, but
yeah,
it's a cool little dog walking park if you have a dog. But
yeah.
even they didn't show up. It was like in the morning. It was a perfect, like a beautiful
Yeah,
summer
yeah.
morning.
When you
So
and I were there, it was really quiet. And yeah, but people like, David commented there are definitely people who get very, very incensed over stuff still, like, almost
well, you know what
insulting.
though? It's like if you go to your sports team, you go to a road game, right?
Yeah,
You're going to be respectful. You're not going to be a jackass,
yeah,
right? And so, admittedly, me wearing a Union hat or me wearing a Sherman T-shirt in Atlanta, I'm kind of asking for it.
yeah.
But I
I did that
kind of
too.
like, but I kind of like the conversation, though. I kind of like, um, because I like hearing people's opinions, whether historically accurate or not, because it's what they think. I
Yeah,
love going to Atlanta, having people tell you that their family was destroyed by Sherman, and they
yeah,
but realized that where they lived wasn't close. But that's what they believe, and that's the mentality.
yeah,
I mean, if I mean you could sit there and talk about Ulrich Dahlgren if you really
yeah,
want to piss some people off in parts of Virginia, right? But you got to be really deep you know in the thicket to
yeah,
even know who he is. But he was, I mean, there's a guy who hanged a guy
yeah.
who hanged a dude for no reason, just because he
Yeah.
thought he was a spy,
Well,
even though
there's
there was no reason I think he
yeah.
was.
Well, I don't know. People get so bent out of shape. It's like, and if you're talking about, say, like, so Rosecrans comes up in Howard's letter, and Howard says, refers to it as Rosecrans's army, and then Rosecrans gets told, he basically gets fired, and Howard was like, I feel so bad for him. I was really looking forward to being under his command.
Yeah.
So there's this kind of like, I think it came as a shock to Howard that he was let go the way he did, and then Grant came down. But Howard had a lot of respect. Like he said, Thomas and Grant were the greatest soldiers in that army, like the greatest commanders in
Yeah,
that Western
you
theater.
hear about McPherson, you hear about him too.
Yeah,
You hear about a lot of the people. McPherson would have been president someday. I
yeah,
mean, he would have been. I mean, it's just I'm convinced of that. But but definitely if you visit a lot of the places, there's a lot of cool things to do. And I mentioned Milroy a little while ago. People don't realize. I mean, if you study the Gettysburg campaign, arguably Milroy is the reason why Gettysburg happens. Right?
yeah,
If he holds Winchester, Third Battle of Winchester, if he holds them and he's able to push Ewell back. That was the final stop. Like the
yeah,
counting on the rocket, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
yeah,
Second Winchester is the one that really it gives Lee the okay, now we're going, because that was the final stop. So
yeah.
if he held that, and he should have, but Milroy was Milroy. They all got bagged at that railroad station.
Poor Milroy.
He snuck away. He got to Harper's Ferry. He got away though, but he
God.
left all of his men. You can say this about Howard. He retreated, but most of his men got away.
Yeah.
Milroy took off and let all his men get caught. And he goes to Harper's Ferry and he's like, yeah, well,
Oh well.
you know,
So sad.
Yeah.
Tyler said, I live in Fredericksburg and I met families who remained here even after the town was absolutely ravished. Their descendants still harbor some feelings about the sacking and bombardment.
Yeah, well, that's the thing is some of the conversations you have with people. You would read those letters this morning about Howard. He's talking about Fredericksburg, about supporting Hancock and
Yeah.
the bombardment of the city and stuff like that. I mean,
He talks
and it
about
was
when they went over on the bridge, like he's telling his wife, yeah, like they were building the pontoons and they had to stop. And then like he talks about the specific regiments that were like, I think it was Mass guys, right? That got in the boat and they're like, we'll go over. And they
yeah,
had to like,
it was Massachusetts men. And the thing about it though is it's you want to talk about a missed opportunity. If those pontoons had got there when they because when that was all going down, Lee was in Richmond, Longstreet's
yeah,
in charge. They had a clear shot to the heights at Marie's Heights, but because of government red tape,
yep,
the pontoons don't get there, and they wanted to go over early and get over. By the time they finally get there, Pickett's guys are down there,
yeah,
and now they're being fired upon. Now you got to fight inch by inch for the town just to get to Marie's Heights.
yeah,
It's really too bad because if things had worked out the way they did, Battle of Fredericksburg could have been completely different, and it would have forced Lee to go closer because Burnside at this point is still trying to sack Richmond.
yeah,
He's kind of island hopping, to use a World War II phrase,
yeah.
and it would have pushed Lee back towards Richmond.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you would have had a shortened overland campaign
Yeah.
in front of Richmond sooner. But those pontoon boats, you can make a case. Those that delayed pontoon boats added a year to the war.
Oh, I would completely agree with that. Yeah, David Maxwell says Fredericksburg was an absolute debacle because of the supply train shenanigans. Yeah, and then you have Meade breaking through Jackson Center. Gibbon gets wounded and can't bring up reinforcements, and then the guy that takes over for Gibbon won't follow orders from Meade, so Meade's got to go personally, like basically go yell at him, be like, "Get the f up here,"
Right.
and then he get like, and I think he ever since that point, I think that's why at Chancellorsville, Meade wanted to attack because he wanted that chance to finally get Jackson.
Yeah, and when you study Fredericksburg, you got to realize too, it's not just Marie's Heights. Prospect Hill Farm, Slaughter Pen Farm is great too. Where that fun lover Maxie Gray gets killed, right up there in those breastworks, and that's the best part. I mean, you can, we had a chance to go there with ski a year or so ago, and we ended up, walking that whole line. And the breastworks at Fredericksburg are great, but Marie's Heights, as much as that's built over, Prospect Hill Farm, that's pristine.
Yeah,
and you can thank American Battlefield Trust for that because they would have built over that whole area.
Yeah,
no
we'll have to go down to Fredericksburg again sometime and hang out with.
I think
Tyler.
After Gettysburg, I think Fredericksburg is my favorite city to visit. I mean, Caroline Street, you can't beat Caroline Street. It's like Baltimore Street or Steinway. You just can't beat it. As far as restaurants and bars, and you actually lost your cell phone twice that week.
Yep.
Because someone had too many IPAs at the bars.
Yeah, Tyler says it's the 20th Mass, 19th Mass, and 42nd and 59th New York that are the first. They were the ones that like, well, we'll go in a boat and we'll go.
Yeah. Yeah. And there was an opportunity. It was an opportunity lost, no question.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, Tom's on here. Good morning, Tom.
Hey, good morning. What is going on?
Yeah.
But it's fascinating to study these stories, and there's a lot of things that the wind blows this way instead of this way. History changes the Civil War.
Yeah.
I think we're so used to trying to figure out what did happen is complicated enough. But when you get to a point when you can kind of see how things might have been different and change history. But Fredericksburg is a big one. I mean, that's a big one.
It's Tyler said, thanks, Halleck. I said Rebellion Whiskey Bar is a must in Fredericksburg.
Yeah, there's a good cigar bar you and I went to down there. Yeah. I forget the name, but it was right on Caroline Street. Cool. Yeah, but there's a lot of cool places like that, and you can enjoy the culture of the town.
Yeah.
And obviously, the Chatham House. It's such a pretty area. Fredericksburg, if you can deal with that traffic getting in and out of there, but it's pretty cool though.
Yeah.
But there's so much to see. There really is. And of course, you can do the Chancellorsville, Spotsylvania, Wilderness. You could do it all.
Yeah.
Just give yourself a couple of days and go see 1781 Brewery.
Yeah. Oh, 1781 Brewery is amazing. That's where Stonewall Jackson had his arm amputated, right?
It is. There's our friends at Civil War Trails. They have a sign put up right there.
Oh, Tyler asked, was it Old Town Tobacco?
I don't. To be honest, even if that's right, I don't remember. But we don't. It was kind of it's just a, sit in the back and fire a cigar.
Yeah.
It probably was. I can't imagine there are too many of those. That's probably where it was. But that was a good time.
Oh, it was
That was a
really
good
fun.
time.
Yeah, David said he can't stand Halleck and Stanton. Neither can I. So annoying.
Stanton was very clear on what he was trying to do. He was basically puppet mastering Lincoln
Oh
versus
yeah.
Halleck, who was trying to be deceptive behind the scenes and trying to screw everybody over.
Yeah.
I mean, how many lives were lost on the Union side or Confederate side for that matter because Halleck was thinking about himself?
Yeah, and he was
You
like
know,
this teenage girl that loves to gossip and go behind people's back and all that. And Frank mentions next year 160th Overland, Spotsylvania Wilderness, and then he's going to go to Fredericksburg again.
I love Spotsylvania. Spotsylvania is so cool. Wilderness is too, but you stand in that mule shoe and you look out
Yeah.
a place where, Allegheny Johnson was captured. You can see where the old stump was. It's just such a pretty area and it's pristine. I hope they do that early morning walk they do in the past, that 4 a.m. walk through the woods that when Barlow they all got lost that night because it was his fault, bad mass, but still there's a lot of cool areas you can go and visit that. And that cemetery nearby is pretty neat too.
Yeah, it's just there's so much to see, and there's still so many battlefields that we haven't seen yet, including in the Western Theater. I want to take you back to Chickamauga again, so you can actually, we can walk out to where Hood was wounded. We can go to where Lytle was killed as well, because we can get there because it was like raining the whole time.
Oh, it was like a monsoon. That was brutal. That place totally floods. But there's if you're living in that Fredericksburg area, you're blessed. Now I grew up in the Boston area, and I lived literally a one-wood drive from the Lexington Battle Green. I probably went there 3 or 4 times in my life, and I was like, I didn't give a shit about. I just never did. So I realized that there are people who live in these places who just don't appreciate the history. But if you appreciate the history, that Fredericksburg area is such a great place because you can go probably within a 2-hour radius and see so much stuff in that area.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Totally. Yeah. You definitely can. Bjorn said, I stole his idea for a biography, Halleck, Mean Girl of the Civil War.
I don't think there's Bjorn, you probably know this way better than I do. Obviously, of course you do. If there's been a couple of real books about Halleck that's come out, and I don't think I've really read one except for references in different books, but he's that slippery shit of a guy. He just is. I'm trying to think, of who he is. Like
Sherman writes this brilliant letter after Halleck screws him over the whole surrender thing, and he basically says, don't ever come near me again, and he calls him a brother in it. And I don't know if that's some kind of Masonic reference or whatever, but he basically says, like, you screwed me over and don't cross my path again. And then he does the whole thing at the Grand Review where Sherman's going along shaking everybody's hand, and then he doesn't shake Halleck's hand.
But and that's the thing. You can draw, you can see like Stanton was kind of like the modern day Dick Cheney with W. Bush, right?
Yeah.
A guy who felt that he was in charge, he was going to kind of pull the strings. But Halleck's unique to history in a lot of different ways. This is a guy who commanded the Western Theater, got pulled east, never hated Grant because he had the job he wanted, and did everything possible to stick it to him as time went on. And he never changed. He never really did.
No.
I mean, I think the Burnside, the pontoons more incompetence and government red tape than him twisting his mustache to make him, to screw him over. But I think when you look at and what's good about studying this war, and you can probably do this from any war, is you look at the pure incompetency in real time on both sides. It's mind-numbing. Pleasanton at Gettysburg, cavalry guy, a very, very underrated and competent overall. But you look at him because he had run DMG, right? You had him, Dave McMurtry, Greg. You can make a case. Everything that went on Breckerhoff Ridge and all that, he helped save Culp's Hill, which ultimately saved the Union. All against Pleasanton, who did everything possible to try to screw it up because he was so incompetent.
Yeah.
Pendleton, speaking of Gettysburg, the Confederate artillery guy, he's another incompetent guy.
Yeah.
And so when you look at something, you will read these guys, you wonder how the hell we even made it to this 2023 on either side.
Yeah. Yeah, right? There's some of them I'm like, how did you get, like Suey Smith?
Well, Suey Smith had his moments, though. I mean, he had a shitty Meridian campaign, right?
So bad.
But he's also against Nathan Bedford Forrest, though.
Oh, I know. Bjorn answered your question. The book about Halleck is called The Commander of All Lincoln's Armies. It's by John Marzalek.
All right, cool. Yeah, I knew that. I knew he'd know, which is great. And that's definitely one to check out if you want to, if you actually want to read a whole book on Halleck. But I think he's somebody. It's fascinating because you kind of get an idea of what, try to get into his head a little bit of what this was. And it all goes back to the fact of how little respect they had for Lincoln. And that's the common thing about all of them, was he had such a little respect that he was some bumpkin, some clown who had no idea what he was doing, that he could be played like clay, right? And they were all taking turns to try to manipulate the guy. He was smart. Lincoln was obviously smarter than people give him credit for, but you can see why he'd be easily to be manipulated by a guy like a Stanton, because he filled his cabinet, if you read Doris Kearns Goodwin's book, with people who didn't really like him
his rivals.
His rivals. So of course they're going to try to, but they all obviously gain a respect for him in time. But Lincoln doesn't get enough credit for putting rivals like that in his thing. And her book it was one of the big pieces of the movie Lincoln. He doesn't get enough credit for that because he put himself on a limb with that. He opened himself up to quite a bit. He could have put a lot of his yes men in there.
Yeah, but he didn't.
But I think, I think it shows his forward thinking that he needed someone to push him a little bit. But I think the Stanton thing was, and especially the Halleck thing was a complete disaster.
Oh personally. Michael, and also who else mentioned it? Michael said go to Vicksburg.
No, Vicksburg. Vicksburg is going to be is
Vicksburg and Shiloh and he mentions Corinth too.
No, we have to. Those are the ones we have to get out to, and you try to with everything, life in general, it's tough to do everything all at one time. But in time, I think Shiloh, Vicksburg. I know we're going to do Franklin next year. Yeah, next fall, right? So we'll see how that goes. Right, and so, but yeah, definitely Shiloh, definitely Vicksburg. That'll be we'll try to just get togethers out there with that. That's see what Leonard's doing.
Yep.
See all the books we've given him over the years.
He has his own library.
He probably has his own. He probably could challenge Bjorn's library probably with the wings. Ironically, the books came from Bjorn, so it's like the bookshop. So it's kind of like
we got to do a trivia night again, and we're probably going to do a trivia night again in the new year too. And we always Bjorn's our sponsor for the trivia night and just one of our sponsors here in the podcast. So any books you win are from Abraham Lincoln Bookshop. Which is awesome. So you always get that cool little bookmark with Lincoln on it too. Yeah. But if you go to Chicago, go visit his book. We said this a million times. It's about beating a dead horse. But Frank went, right? Yeah, Frank went to it. Frank Garcia, he went over there and met him. And did Amanda Clough go there too? I don't know if she's been there yet. She lives in Chicago. She's not going to call the principal's office if she's never been to Chicago. She's been there. She's right there. Yeah, MJ said that she'd like to get out to Monocacy for the 160th next year. That too would be awesome. Matt Borders does a great job as the park ranger there, and he's done a good job with really promoting it. And I told you I was there. We were driving through there in Frederick last summer with some friends, and one of them, he studies the Civil War. He's he not like nerd level, but he not studies reading it. Howard's letters at breakfast. But he's like, what's this Battle of Monocacy? Was that like a Rev War battle? I'm like, you ever heard of Battle of Monocacy? I had to explain the whole thing with Lew Wallace and Gordon. He goes, no, I never. It was battle that saved Washington. He goes, I don't know how the hell I never heard of this. I'm like, it's just one of those battles that falls by the wayside, and it's so close to Gettysburg. We see people going out to Monterey Pass and going to places like that. But if you're in Gettysburg and you got some extra time and you want to get out of the burg, you want to do your get out of the burg tour, right? Yeah. Take a ride down to Frederick and go check out Monocacy, and it's awesome. Great little visitor store. The hoodies though, can't beat the hoodies. Yeah, I bet they will have 160th hoodies. And yes, Frank did go see Bjorn. And yeah, Frank said he's very knowledgeable in a great bookstore. Yeah, that was cool. I had the virtual tour when you were there, but you got to see the actual bookstore and stuff, which is awesome. Yeah, no, it's cool. But we'll go to. I think we'll go to Chicago next summer. I think we've talked about that, but we'll go out there and check out, go see Bjorn and have a good time. Chicago's a great. I love Chicago. I've never been before. Yeah, you finally put you in the big city of New York City last weekend. Yep, I'd never been to New York either. The Canadian in Times Square with all the big lights and big buildings. You're like a squirrel on the highway, looking at everything. New York's fun. We had a good time with that. Yeah. And just like we said, there's so much Civil War in New York City. It's you have to know where to go, but there's a lot of it. Yeah, like especially like the draft riots. And then we were driving back from the Grant tomb into Manhattan, and I see this statue up ahead of us. I'm like, oh, that looks like a Civil War statue. Drive
It's
by.
Franz Siegel.
Franz Siegel. I'm like, Siegel's got a statue in New York.
Yeah,
That's random.
right on West Side Highway, just head right along the river. So no, it's good. It's cool. There's definitely a lot of cool places to do that. But Chicago's great. But there's a lot of cool places to go. But for this 160th coming up for 2024, there's so many cool things coming, and I know a lot of these places. I mean, Gettysburg went really over the top for this one last year, and a lot of these places do. But
March to the Sea will be 160 next year.
I'm going to guess they're not going to go crazy celebrating that one.
Probably not. That'd be great. Well, considering they called the hockey team at one time the Atlanta Flames.
Yeah, I got to give them. Someone's got a sense of humor with that,
And then when the Olympics were on, like they had some campaign where it was like Sherman, Atlanta's original torchbearer.
I think that was a joke, though. I don't think NBC, the Olympics, put that one out there.
Tyler says he's convinced DiCaprio needs to play Siegel in a film.
I think DiCaprio could probably play anybody, to be honest.
Yeah, because I have to do this. Like I'm in like the fantasy part of my Killer Angels project where I'm talking about it if it were published in 2023, and I'm actually going to do a Netflix series. So I get to cast that, and I'm like, where do I put DiCaprio? Because I want DiCaprio to be in the series.
Well, you could definitely get him in there. Because he's someone who I think he's in history will show him to be one of the great actors of our time. And it's amazing to think that he was kind of one of these boy actors who kind of came out of nowhere.
Yeah.
But he needs to be in some Civil War. He was on Shutter Island, which is not really a Civil War movie, although it took place in a Civil War location. Yeah. So he's on his way.
We're going to be talking about that island in our next episode because that's where Hiram Granberry was held. And I think there's a couple books on Hiram Granberry, but they're like older books. Because there's not much, like Granberry's a very, like, he's a fascinating character, but there's a lot about him that's not known too. Right?
Which one? DiCaprio?
Hiram Granberry.
Oh,
paying attention?
No, I was just reading something, but Granberry's cool though, because I mean he's a guy. I mean, most people, substantially most people in the real life, not people here, have no idea who Hiram Granberry is. But he's one of he's a big loss. He's one of the Franklin Six, but his life is just sad. It just is, and the fact that his wife kind of disappeared to obscurity, and because of the fact that her where she's buried is now in a private family plot, and there's no family members left alive. They can't legally exhume her or put him back in Texas with Grant. So they're permanently apart. And it's just one of those things. You think someone would just like friggin' look the other way and, get something signed and would dig her up and move her over to Texas. But yeah, that's it's a sad part of history with that. No question.
Yeah, it's a very sad story. Speaking of sad stories too, MJ mentioned like raising a glass tonight for Cushman, who dies in 1893. So 130 years ago.
Don't forget John Brown.
Of an overdose of morphine. And yes, John Brown as well.
Right. John Brown, the meteor, he was executed today, 1859.
MJ asked who I was going to have portraying Hancock, and I don't know yet. So suggestions are welcome.
I think you were talking about was it Carrot Top? Is that who you said?
God.
No, it was Ronald McDonald. That's who it was. No, but what's his name? Brian Mallon does a good job with
he does. And it's hard to like think of outside of that, but the ones that weren't in the movie, like, I mean, Howard was in it for all of like 3 seconds, but I'm thinking of having Casey Affleck play him because.
Yeah, you keep saying that. That's an interesting choice. I was thinking Casey Affleck is that SNL Dunkin' Donuts skit, but that'd be a good one. Just don't do Ben Affleck because he sucks. I hate.
Oh no, I'm not putting Ben Affleck in it. I love Casey Affleck though, so I'll put him in. Gentili says need to do the John Gentili tour of Mosby Land, and then MJ said, "I thought you were giving tours of Harrisburg."
Oh yeah, everybody's gonna meet at Piccolo's. We're all gonna meet at Piccolo's in Harrisburg.
At night, we thought we were gonna die.
That was the second time I heard John Gentili scream like a girl. I think we pulled in that parking lot. We realized we were. That was we did we did that thing at the National Civil War Museum a few months ago. When we that ride back with me and you and John and MJ was what was definitely one of the more high points that summer. That was about as fun. I don't think I've laughed so hard in my life as we were driving back. That was a good time.
It was, yeah, and that was a great event at the museum. And I actually should mention the museum on December the 9th. So that is next Saturday. Elizabeth Barron, I think she's there in person to talk about her book, Longstreet.
Yeah, I mean, if you get a chance, we said before, if you go to if you go online, you see Bjorn's interview with her, and you watch the one that we did, you're gonna absolutely, if you're in the area, want to go see her talk. And so she's up there with our friend Mary Beth and the gang up there, and Dean and all them at the museum. Go see it, because she's so knowledgeable on Longstreet,
Yeah.
and also a lot of aspects of the Civil War. She's got a whole bunch of books. But she's so personable, and she has that thing about her where you could just talk all day with her. And so we promised we'd keep her to an hour, which we did.
Yeah.
But we could have gone on forever with her.
Oh yeah, we could have. Yeah, it was a great episode. Tom mentions the book about Hiram Granbury's Lone Star General Hiram B. Granbury by Rebecca Blackwell Drake and Thomas Holder is a good one. So I'll just try and find that.
No, it's great these books are out there. I mean, Hiram Granbury, I remember when I was in college, I was down in the town of Granbury, Texas. And what's funny was he's an interesting dude too, because his actual name was Granbury, and he changed it for some inexplicable reason.
Yeah, I was reading about that. I remember we were watching that movie where Benedict Cumberbatch is in it, right? And we had just been talking about like how Hiram Granbury, like we were talking on this Facebook Live about how Hiram Granbury had a deep voice. Mm-hmm. And as soon as Benedict Cumberbatch has this, like, he's got a Southern drawl in whatever movie this is. And I think didn't I say to you, I'm like, that's how Hiram Granbury sounded.
He had a deep, powerful voice.
But you remember Benedict Cumberbatch in that movie where he had the Southern accent?
Yeah, I'm not sure who Cumberbatch is, but I'll take your word for it.
He's the tall guy, British actor. He was in that
Larry
movie.
Bird. Who?
He was in that movie we watched with Jodie Foster.
Okay.
Yeah, you don't even.
Well, we'll have to reconnect on that one. But whoever he is, but I think he has. I think what I've read. But what's funny, because you find someone asked him, his sister, because obviously he was killed at Franklin, why he changed his name, and she's like, I have no idea why, but he just did. Yeah. So it's one of those things. He just changed it to Granbury.
And then Frank mentions in the afterlife he changed it to Banbury.
Yeah, he's Banbury. So I know who Cumberbatch is now. You know why I know him? Because he was that guy in that Between Two Ferns with Galifianakis.
Yes,
that's who. Okay, it's sad. That's how I know him from. But I remember that. Okay, now I know who he was. But isn't he British though?
Yeah, but in the movie we watched, he had a Southern accent, and I was like, that's how Hiram Granbury probably.
Oh yeah, okay,
like, I know. Really deep voice.
I guess that mystery's solved now. I guess I can die happy now. But that's how he was, and you got to give the Union guys credit, because Granbury's caught at Fort Donelson. He gets bagged, and he loses all his men, and he gets bounced around a little bit because he's an officer.
He's on Johnson. I read somewhere he was on Johnson's Island for a while, but I don't think it was open as a prison by that point.
No, I'm not sure how that was, but I know I think a lot of his men went to different places because he was an officer. He went to Fort Warren in Boston. Yeah. And they talk about how he played baseball in the green with the guys and running around. It was not Andersonville by any stretch of the imagination. No. And when he had gotten paroled, but he had to wait some time to be released, to be exchanged. And as soon as the Union jailers found out that his wife was sick, they let him go immediately. Yeah. And you got to give credit to the Union guys for that, because they understood, and sadly she died. And
she was with him throughout the Civil War. Like, she was like John Brown Gordon's wife, and she just went with him. And I think it was like, she had ovarian cancer, but and by the time they discovered it was too late for her. And she told him to go back to war, but then he got wounded at a battle. But I think he was going to go back anyway, because she was going to die, and he could not afford to buy her a gravestone, which is so sad. Like, and they were apparently very, very close with each other. She was 7 years younger than him. So they were married when she was 20 and he was 27. And then when I was like reading about that, it hit me yesterday. He wasn't even 40 when he died. right?
He was young. I mean,
He was 31 or
a
32.
lot of these guys are young though. I mean, that's the thing is they I mean, how old was Howard? Was he like 32 or something?
He was the youngest corps commander at Gettysburg. He was
I mean,
32 years old.
these are young guys. I mean, for God's sakes, I mean, just think about the I mean, granted, people didn't live as long, although a lot of people live long lives, but to be put in that situation that young.
Yeah, he had just turned 34 a few days before the March to the Sea began.
Mm-hmm.
I remember like thinking when I was 34 and thinking about that, and I was like, what the like, no way. Like, you know, I'm 41 and I'm back getting my master's degree, right? So it tells you where I was at when I was like 34. But still, like, you know, I think Hiram Granberry was 31 or 32 when he was killed at Franklin.
Yeah.
Which
No,
is
exactly. And we just got to finish watching the John Adams thing again. I
that
watched
show is
that.
amazing.
I watched that when it came out years and years and years ago. But aside from Benjamin Franklin, who was probably about 70, you know, when this Revolutionary War was going on, most of these guys were young too.
Yeah.
John Adams, Sam Adams, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison. These guys were not old guys either. So it's
No.
amazing when you think about. Wow, that makes you feel bad about yourself when you realize these people achieved.
Yeah,
you know?
at such a young age. And yeah, the John Adams series, if anybody hasn't seen it, watch it. It actually will give you you know, it'll make you be like, holy shit, no wonder the Civil War was fought. There's one point where, you know, it's Jefferson and Franklin and Adams, and they're sitting around discussing slavery. And Jefferson is basically like, I know it's bad, but and it's like, oh my God.
No, he had that quote where he says it's like grabbing a wolf by the ears. You hate it, but you never let it go.
Yeah.
And the seeds and I think they mentioned that when you go to the Visitor Center in Gettysburg, that the beginning with the Morgan Freeman movie was the Civil War. The seeds of the Civil War are planted in the Constitution. It just was, and you had to satisfy to get these states like South Carolina, Virginia, especially to sign on to this thing. And the Adams thing is great because it shows how contentious it was and how a lot of these New York of all states was one of the last ones to agree to do this. They wanted no part of seceding. Of independence, but they had to put things in that were non-sustainable. John Adams was a big, you know, anti-slave guy for his era.
Yeah.
And these guys are all sitting around, and I think to a man, they probably knew that everything that they were doing someone was going to pay the price for it down the road. And it was going to be the institution of slavery. It was going to be. And that was obviously that was a big deal, but they had to deal with the initial things originally. And
it's now maybe I've decided over winter break I'm going to read Meacham's book about Thomas Jefferson, because Thomas Jefferson, I mean, yes, he's not a great person in some respects, but he has always been interesting to me. I remember when I went to Washington for the first time when I was 10 years old, my dad was more interested in seeing the Jefferson Memorial than he was the Lincoln Memorial, because he'd always like really been fascinated with Jefferson. I remember going to the Jefferson Memorial with him, but the actor who plays Jefferson is amazing.
No, it was in that series. I know this is not Civil War, but it really showed how much
the division between the states at that time.
It also showed how much Washington was in Hamilton's pocket in a lot of ways. Where we talk about Stanton manipulating Lincoln.
Oh, Hamilton!
You know, Washington was absolutely manipulated by Hamilton, and you could see it, especially when that whole French Revolution thing came out, and they had to almost went to war with France, and that's what's interesting about it. Was they had experience in just one or two generations before of seeing Civil War.
Yeah,
and I think they knew, and Adams was very outspoken about the slavery thing here in Boston, because he realized that it was unsustainable and that at some point they were going to have to deal with it, but it would not on their watch. They'd all be dead by then.
Yeah.
But if you haven't seen it, check it out. Absolutely.
Yeah. Just real quick before we get back to the Civil War talk, but I'd say like when I saw, like, I love the musical Hamilton, but I came away from it thinking, wow, he's a bastard. I liked Aaron Burr, literally a bastard. Hamilton's literally a bastard, but I was like, this Hamilton guy is kind of a dick.
So judgmental.
Ran his mouth all the time, but my favorite characters in that were Aaron Burr and Thomas Jefferson. because I love seeing like all the rivalries. You really get a sense of that. And I know it's not like 100% true to the history, but it was kind of my introduction to that part of American history, because I've been always Civil War. Like that's,
Yeah.
and I know next to nothing about Canadian history. I said to you, I rhymed off the first 5 presidents to you. And then I said, don't ask me to rhyme off the first 5 prime ministers because I can't.
No, no, but
John A.
like
McDonald's the first Canadian prime minister. I can't name.
well, like we say with the big battles, I mean, if you're going to study Gettysburg, and we know a lot of people really
Yeah.
love Gettysburg, you better know your Second Winchester, right? You better know your Maryland campaign, and if you want to study the Civil War, you kind of have to understand the Rev War, but especially that post-war politics.
Oh yeah,
because that's where I mean, a lot of it's created from that, and and the issues of Jefferson was obviously very big in the states' rights. Hamilton was pushing the strong federal government, the federal bank, and a lot of these issues would come later on. The industrial North versus the agrarian South, and it was going to be a flashpoint, and especially that Adams shows really well how much focus was put on the individual states.
Yeah,
and that was the mindset at the time because they were afraid of a monarch. They didn't want George Washington or Adams or Jefferson or Madison or any of these guys to be a dictator. And one of the things Washington did better than anything was he stepped down. He refused to be His Royal Highness of the Americas, despite the fact that that a lot of these guys kind of wanted, like Hamilton, wanted to emulate the English style and just be America but England.
Well, when he shows up in that uniform and Adams is like, what the hell, dude? Like, what are you dressed up for?
No, but again, when you look at a lot of these guys, then you start to see a lot of the relatives of these guys. Paul Revere, fighting at Gettysburg. Obviously Rufus Dawes, with William Dawes, and so these are people when you look at people, nowadays, when I was a kid, I'd see World War II veterans in the parades. They grew up seeing Revolutionary War veterans, and we're blessed here in Massachusetts to go to any cemetery and find Daughters of the American Revolution grave sites of these people, those monuments, like you see the GAR monuments.
Well, we were wandering around there on Thanksgiving Day morning, because that's what one does. You go to cemeteries. Like I really, like we were walking and we were Rev War vet. And you said, these guys died never knowing there was going to be a civil war. They died, it was just that's,
No, but no, a lot. I think a lot. Adams, I think, probably did know at some point, or something was going to happen, because he writes and he has references to the states seceding and pulling apart and all that stuff, and it's why Hamilton wanted a strong federal government, and so if Jefferson was alive in the 1860s, he probably would have been a pro-secesh guy, because he was so big into the states' rights thing, and that's where you get a lot of the states' right thing. Forget putting the whole slavery thing out the window for a second. I think he would have been a guy that would have focused on the states, I think, realistically. But this was the mindset coming out of that. And they knew what's great about the Civil War, and I say this politically, was all the things that the founding fathers put in place. The Civil War proved that it could happen. That unfortunately it led to the biggest bloodletting in American history. But at the end of the war, it created a strong federal government. And whether people wanted it or not, the country is today because of the Civil War.
It helped. It helped, and some people would dispute me. They have disputed me on this before. The Civil War is why Canada became a country. That's my opinion. It created a country. Because we were on the chopping block with Britain.
The United States wanted Canada as retribution from England for the blockade runners, for all the stuff that went on in England. We had Alexander Rose on. We talked about that, and they settled on $20 million instead.
That's what
England could have said, "We like our money, just take Canada," and then and who knows what would happen.
Gentili says my crankiness level is already where John Adams was at the end during the painting unveiling.
And that's a scene they actually got right. Was a lot of the people hated the idea they were all stood around and got in line to sign. I remember when I was a a young kid back in the day taking field trips and some of the Boston Red War stuff.
Yeah.
They always talked about that saying was actually signed on July 2nd, and people were coming and going all summer, and it wasn't, that picture's not really true. And a lot of the founding fathers hated that picture because it was not historically accurate. But Adams was a grumpy prick. He was a typical. He just was. But
Yeah.
Giamatti did a great job playing him.
Oh, he did. And yeah, like the actor who played, and I was like, with Jefferson, I was like, I know this actor from somewhere. And sure enough, it was Stannis Baratheon, who's my favorite character in Game of Thrones. It's like, that's where it is. Because he's got such a unique voice. Frank mentions this month marks 3 years since I transitioned from a casual to a serious during the Civil War, and thanks to this podcast. Well, thank you.
Oh, wow, that's very kind of you. I mean,
we got to hang out with Frank in Gettysburg. He's a fun kid to hang out with.
Yeah, he was. No, we appreciate that. I mean, obviously, it's I think anybody who studies this, certainly not because of us, the people who fought these battles and write the books about the battles, the ones people should be really focused on. But it's neat that you can create some sort of awareness to it. But it's fun. I mean, it's fun to talk about it because the more you study that war, the more you learn about today's society, politics in general, and you kind of learn about yourself too. Yeah. Because when you study, especially the causes of the war and some of the people in the war, it kind of shows people's colors sometimes too, right?
Well, you gravitate towards certain individuals, I think, and I've definitely obviously gravitated on the Union side to Howard and to General Meade. The Confederate side, Claiborne and Granbury are the two guys I really, really like to study. Claiborne, I mean, is obviously well known, but because he's such he's so different from the other ones. We had Simons on to talk about him, and that was a fascinating discussion. And like you tried to find something that Claiborne said about slavery, and he didn't say anything about it. And Granbury just doesn't have that voice in history.
Claiborne, for the most part, I mean, we've had conversations with people on social media all the time about these people, but he was someone who literally fought for the South because that's where he was. He felt Helena, Arkansas was his true home. He found his home, and he was a lawyer who got pulled in. He ended up fighting for it. It's very similar to Gordon, right? When he was in charge of that 6th Alabama, they were both, a lawyer in Gordon's case, a pharmacist or a pharmacist apprentice in Claiborne's case, but that's how it was. And look, no one justifies what the hell they're friggin' fighting for. But again, if it's a situation where a lot of these guys weren't military guys, they were pulled into it. And some of the best commanders on either side weren't the West Point guys. The West Point guys were stuck in that Clausewitz, not so much Clausewitz because he wasn't translated to English till a couple years later, but Jomini, Dennis Mahan, guys like that, where they were this textbook type of theory, this Neapolitanic type battle, whereas the Claibornes or some of the other guys were able to get out of that mindset. We're able to fight differently, and it's no surprise. It really is. Times were changing. That was the thing.
Yeah. And if anybody on here is looking for a great book to read about Claiborne, Craig Simon's book, it was published I think 15 years ago, but it's held up so well, and he tells the story so well. And for a guy who studies the Navy, like he's a professor from Annapolis, for him to study Claiborne, and he said it was because a student wrote a paper about him, and then he was like, I need to study, I need to write a book about this guy. And he tells his
it's neat how those stories come out.
He tells his story so well from such a human perspective, and I love that he includes the Sue Tarleton story in it as well, because that's a huge part of Claiborne. I mean, it's a small part of his history, but she changes him as a person. Like I think he was pretty grumpy. That's the impression I got. And then after he met Sue, apparently he was like really happy, and he'd joke around with his men and all this other stuff, right? And the other book that Simons has written is about Joseph E. Johnston, and I definitely want to read that one.
Yeah, we got to do that. But in any case,
because Johnston is a great study as well.
Yeah, that Stonewall the West book is really good, and Craig is humble enough to sit there and say, yeah, he got the idea from a student writing the paper. And that's what's great about a lot of these guys. Masterson Brown's like that too. He's humble, and obviously Elizabeth, we just talked the other day. She's somebody who wrote the book, who felt that she wanted to write the book to tell his story, and she realizes that writing about Confederate generals is probably not the most appropriate thing nowadays because of the way the world is. But she to go back to the original episode for this one we just did was her book really, and we're all about personifying people.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Well, we were putting people away from that crusty black and white image of these people we see. That's why we do the pictures for these episodes, right? But
Yeah.
but her book really captures his personality. And he, and what's great about it was, he's aloof. He's a lot like, you can see the Lee influence a lot too,
Yeah.
because he gets named the ambassador to Turkey under Rutherford B. Hayes. He wants to stay in the government. He moves to Gainesville, Georgia. He wants to stay in the government. He kind of burned his bridge in Louisiana with the whole militia thing, but he goes over to Georgia and he ends up being the ambassador. He wants to be the commissioner of Northern Georgia. That doesn't work out, but he converts to Catholicism around this time.
Yeah.
And there are missionaries in Turkey who are trying to push Catholicism. And Turkey's not a big, to this day, is not a very big, Christian country, obviously. And he tries to support the missionaries to the Ottoman Empire. And of course, it blows up in his face, and he ends up going there and drinking and being a partier and gets sent back. But it shows that he feels that he can kind of be a political type of operative and kind of a true ambassador. And he's basically trying to sell ice to Eskimos up there. And it just doesn't, it just doesn't work out. But it shows his kind of naivete a little bit, but feels that he has to try. And that's another fascinating thing about Longstreet no one talks about too, is his international stuff. Like in the Ottoman Empire, like what a country America is. You have an ambassador who actually literally fought to destroy the country. How the hell does that happen? And they were just stunned that they would ever do that. But there's so many stories just waiting to be discovered in her book that I can't say enough about what a fun book that is to read.
Yeah.
Especially after Appomattox, because she stops talking about the Civil War by like page 100, and the book is 300. The sweet spot in this book is his time in New Orleans, his time in Gainesville, Georgia, and his time in Turkey. And then at the end of the war, he gets eye cancer. And he loses about 100 pounds. He's like 130 pounds when he dies.
And he's a big guy. Like, it was so funny. I once showed my mom a picture of Longstreet, and her first words were, "That looks just like my brother Dave." And now, like, whenever I see my Uncle Dave, I'm like, oh my God, I almost called him like James when I saw him last time.
And he gets remarried. He keeps trying to reinvent his life. He gets married to Helen Dorsch, I think like 1894, something like that. And she ends up living until 1962. James Longstreet's his last wife there. And so it's he's like the Energizer Bunny. He just doesn't want to give up. He keeps trying to get new jobs, remarry, try to keep his life going. He tries to reboot his life over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Almost to the day he dies.
Yeah.
But sadly, for him, he gets cancer and dies, and his last days are pretty miserable. But but if you're looking to get under the psyche of some of these dudes and get away from this blue line, red line thing, read the book about him. Whether you like Longstreet, whether you hate Longstreet, you can't deny the guy really did a 180 for, in his mind, to make the country better and get away from this war, this lost cause bullshit that a lot of the Jubal Earlys, the D.H. Hills of the world were really pushing.
Yeah.
And that's what's fascinating about him, is I think he was legit and sincere about it too. He wasn't like Gordon trying to alternative motives.
Yeah.
I think he literally felt, and I think it's because the kindness that Grant gave Lee at Appomattox, and the fact that he was close with Lee at West Point.
Yeah.
Right. And the war might have ended sooner if Edward Ord and Longstreet, they kind of negotiated some sort of peace that Halleck and Stanton rejected. Right before Appomattox. He was someone ahead of the curve who knew that the time was about to be ending here, and they needed to try to move on. So that's what's neat about Longstreet.
Yeah. Now, before we jump off, we've got some really great. There's a lot of good discussion going on, which is awesome. So I think, who was it up here? James asked about a good book about General Thomas. A few of us responded. General George Henry Thomas, Is True as Steel by Brian Steele Wills is one. Malcolm mentions that Claiborne's one of his favorite generals, one, because he's Irish, and two, because he was such a good general. I think he was honestly the best, one of the best in the Civil War on either side. Jim mentions he's got 2 books on George Thomas. Jim, by the way, has an amazing book collection. It's like he's on the lives and he'll be like, I have that, or on our roundtables, he'll be like, I have that book right here. And he just magically pulls it off the shelf.
Yeah, you swear he's a plant or something. You know what I mean? It's like we're gonna talk about American Ulysses by Ronald C. White. Oh, like, this one. Here.
That and the sign he made. He made the sign too. And then Malcolm says Franklin was a bad move for Claiborne. It's a bad move for everybody.
Yeah, well, that's a tough one too. I mean, and there are different sources you can read, about Franklin and about Hood, and people have their opinions of Hood. People have their opinions on all these guys.
Yep.
But as time goes on, and more people, the Varins of the world, the Master Browns of the world, in the Racinos of the world, they write these modern books that are coming out. It definitely sheds more light on these subjects, and definitely it makes you think. Whether you agree with them or not, it definitely makes you think.
Yeah, if it's making you think, even if you don't agree, if you think about it, and all that it's just like these guys are humans. And I was just thinking, like, I know we're going to jump off here soon, but like, and I think Simons talks about this in his book, that they get to Franklin that morning or whenever it is, right? Like, what time do they get to Franklin? Around noon on the 30th?
Yeah, because they leave in the morning. It's from Spring Hill,
Hill.
It's sleeting and it's cold. It's not like people think Civil War battles are all fought in this dusty heat. This was a cold weather battle.
Yeah, and it's like the painting that is my background is from Battle of Franklin, so you can see the sun is setting, so the clouds have kind of moved off and stuff, and that is not Red Pepper, Claiborne's horse, because Red Pepper got shot right before, I think, just as he was riding off. But there's a story that when they got there, Claiborne was standing under a tree and he grabbed a stick and he draws a checkerboard in the dirt. And he and one of his staff play checkers, and that's like 4.5 hours before Claiborne dies. And that's the stuff that shows they're like, yes, they're commanding people, they're, having to do these battle plans or whatever, but these are like, Claiborne in his last hours he wants to play checkers, which is something that he enjoyed. And then, Malcolm asked, and this is really, I saw this too. He said that Gettysburg College is doing a contest for high school students to reword the Gettysburg Address into modern context.
No way. That's awesome.
Malcolm, you need to do that. Gentili said that whoever owns Claiborne's childhood home was not welcoming. They treated me like Hancock would if I were trying to steal some of his fries.
Oh boy, lucky MJ jumped off.
He's gonna get RKO'd.
Oh yeah. So. But we should get ready to jump off. It's almost doing this. Time goes so fast when we do this. And we got stuff to do. We got a busy afternoon, Mary.
Yes, we do.
Sit around talk about these old dusty Civil War guys. We got life to live. Yeah. No, but it's good. It's good to do this stuff. So hopefully people enjoy the episode, listen to it. If you get a chance to go to the National Civil War Museum in Harrisburg and you make it past Piccolo's safely, go up there.
Maxwell mentioned Piccolo's. He's like, "Oh my God, we drove by that place."
If you get past there, you're in the clear. That's like running the gauntlet of Vicksburg. If you get past Piccolo's.
That's what we did that night with Gentili in the car.
But no, go check her out and go and if you do go, let them know you support the podcast. I'm happy to hear that, because we're definitely big supporters there, and they do a lot of good stuff for us too. But yeah, so we are going to be doing an episode on Granbury this week. That's the plan. So we're going to try to do that, and then we'll set up one of these live things again pretty soon. But we have a lot of good stuff.
We're probably going to do our next roundtable is probably going to be, we are going to have a bit of a subject, because Darren did a talk at his Freemason Lodge about Civil War, Freemasonry in the Civil War. And we've had some interest in people wanting to hear that talk. So our next roundtable, half an hour of that will be Darren giving that talk. And then
is it?
Yes,
news to me.
Okay. We already talked about it.
I'm gonna have to clean up a little bit, because there's some non-Masons on this.
Well, yes, the cleaned up version of it. I'm
gonna have to give a watered down version, but it's okay.
And Malcolm says he reenacts as the third course, so he can have a Carney badge on his hat. That's very cool.
Oh, very cool. It's pretty cool when people find they gravitate towards the people that they respect. I mean, obviously, You like Howard. I like guys like Charles Tilden. We have a lot of people on. Maxwell likes Ellsworth. So the people on here, and obviously MJ with Cushman, and so it's great that people find their sweet spot. They find what gravitates to them because when you study them and you learn more, obviously,
you kind of become a champion for them too.
Well, that's true, but you got to be able to see their flaws. You got to be able to take a peek at this and see. It's neat though. It's pretty neat to do. So, but that's the plan for us coming forward. So we got a lot of cool stuff coming down the pike, and
I love that you have George Washington Barbie in your background too.
Like that, huh? Pretty cool. That's pretty cool. Someone gave that to us, so I have it here, my little den here. So it's pretty cool. All right. So any final words from you there, Fincher, before we jump off and let people enjoy their days?
Thank you to you for being the awesome co-host, and thank you to everybody who jumped on here this morning and has supported us for these 119 episodes, like 3 years of the podcast. So we really appreciate all of you coming on here, and I love seeing the discussions in the chat with each other and just. You guys
and I think it's one thing we definitely need to do is plan some more get-togethers. If anybody's going to be in Gettysburg around Christmas time or New Year's, we'll be down there, try to hang out, do something like that. Obviously, we want to do something out in Tennessee. We want to do stuff like that just to get out and hang out. It's just cool to go hang with people and to talk. So I love sitting in a bar, the beer in your hand, talking about battle, just like we're doing right now with like people. It's just so much fun. There's such a great community. I've always said before that the Civil War community is the smartest group I know, and because people have great discussions, despite the fact that it brings upon so much angst in conversation. I find people be very, very respectful overall. Despite this, and it's just you learn by having conversations, by being around like-minded people who want to have those conversations, which is why I think it's such an important part of history and such a fascinating discussion to have. And there's a lot of cool places that still exist you can have these conversations at.
Absolutely. And Tyler said he appreciates us. We appreciate you, Tyler. Tyler has the Unfiltered Historian over on Facebook, which is really awesome. They do a really awesome live stream as well, so definitely check that out. David said he's going to be at Franklin for the 160th, which is awesome.
Yeah, we should probably try to get down. We'll see how the world looks a year from now. I think we'll be having some changes in our lives next year, certainly. So we'll have to go from there and see what we're going to do. But anyway, so great time with everybody. So thanks for jumping on. We appreciate it. It's great to have so many people come on to talk about this stuff and read the book. Here it is right here. Yep. Elizabeth R. Varyn. Longstreet, the Confederate general who defied the South. And if you are in the area, and I'm being totally serious with this, go check out her talk over at the museum. Go check out Bjorn's video he did with her, because I think she's somebody who she has a lot of balls right in this.
Oh yeah,
because just like the real James Longstreet, she alienates pretty much everybody with this book because it goes in the face of a lot of popular thinking. But his stories, like a lot of these people, both North and South, tell a very important story. And the more you read, the more you learn. And that's what the whole thing's all about. No question. So.
Well, thank you, everybody. Jim Samia said that have a truth this afternoon and one for Skeet. That's the truth. Gonna get her ass kicked.
He'll be moving in with us here pretty soon. He keeps running his mouth like that.
He'll show up on the doorstep.
We'll get a ding dong from the truth. So we'll find out. So he's an awesome sense of humor. They're the great people, et cetera, et cetera. All right, guys. Have a great rest of the weekend. We look forward to talking to you all soon on the other side. And we will talk to you all